Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nina Goodrich. I am the Executive Director for Green Blue and the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, and I am joined here today by Luana Pinheiro, the Sustainability Transformation Manager Americas for Tetra Pak, and David Tulauskas, the Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer for BlueTriton Brands. And before we actually get started in our conversation, we're going to be talking about how to set 2025 packaging goals. I wanted to share with you just a few highlights from our Sustainable Packaging Coalition's goals database. So this is a database that we put together from publicly available information, and we update it. We try to update it constantly, and folks who are in the database can actually go in and update it themselves. But we have 152 brands and retailers and 226 converters and manufacturers in the database. The first thing we learned was that there's a difference between goals and statements of support. And so some folks have target dates and baseline data and measurement and metrics, and other folks talk about striving to, encouraged, give preference to. So there's a real difference between an actual goal and a statement of support. The other thing we noticed was that there's a difference between catch-all goals. So some folks think about a catch-all goal to provide some flexibility. And by flexibility, I mean providing a range of options to achieve a desired outcome. So think about, we might want to decouple plastic from fossil fuel feedstocks. So a goal might be to use only renewable or post-consumer recycled plastic content. And that would be aligned in the same piece of the life cycle. Whereas a catch-all goal that's not so good would conflate different lifestyle segments, such as use recycled or recyclable materials. And so what we saw was most of the catch-all goals that were aligned in the same section of the life cycle seemed to work a little bit better than two that were on different opposing ends of that life cycle. So where are most of the goals? We have goals in the area of bio-based renewable materials, eliminating unfavorable materials, looking at recovery infrastructure, but the big ones are material efficiency, design for recovery, recycle content, and responsible fiber sourcing. And those are most of the goals in the database. And interestingly enough, most of the recycled content goals are for fiber. And plastic is catching up, but most of them, fiber's been around a little bit longer in terms of recyclability goals, so we see that. Not unsurprisingly, we see far fewer goals in the manufacturer and converter sector. We have a notable exception here on our panel today, but for the most part, the brands and retailers are leading the charge with the most ambitious goals. Most goals are for 2025, although we're seeing some stretching out to 2030. And the other really interesting takeaway from the goals database was that when we looked at corporate sustainability goals versus packaging sustainability goals, there's a big difference. So again, corporate sustainability goals have been around for a lot longer. We tend to see 77% of the statements are actually goals as opposed to statements of support, whereas on the packaging side, it's still about half and half. So corporate sustainability goals are leading, but packaging goals are catching up. So that's just a really brief overview of what's in the database. The database is a searchable base that you can look at by sector, you can look at your competitors, you can look at your customers, and get a feel for what type of goals are different folks setting in this space. So with that, I'd like to move to our panelists. And what I would love to hear is just an overview of your company's 2025 goals. And maybe Luana, we could start with you.
Okay, so we have talking about corporate and packaging goals and how they are connected. Sustainability is really a core pillar at Tetra Pak. It's reflected on our brand promise to protect what's good for food, for people, for the planet. And packaging is a significant part of our business. So it's kind of fairly easy for us to connect both corporate and packaging goals. So, and I can just mention one example of how we are doing that. So On the corporate side, for example, we have our net zero greenhouse gas emissions ambition. We aim to reach this net zero greenhouse gas emissions in our own operations by 2030 and in the entire value chain by 2050. And to connect it with it on the packaging side, we aim to achieve the world's most sustainable package that will be fully renewable, fully recyclable, responsibly sourced, and carbon neutral, which completely supports our corporate net zero ambition too.
Wonderful. David.
All right, so maybe I could introduce myself in the context of BlueTriton Brands. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, you may be familiar with us, formerly known as Nestle Waters North America. So today we're a standalone company and remain one of the largest water companies in the US, which include home and office delivery service, providing water and returnable, refillable packaging, filtration services, and then other products, as well as bottled water sold under, which continue to be sold under 6 regional spring water brands and several brands sold nationally. So that's who BlueTriton Brands is. We have sustainability goals related to water, packaging, climate, and waste. And in terms of our 2025 packaging goals, let me provide some context. So we envision, and it's kind of related to what Luana was saying, kind of the big picture, is our packaging goals really are built from a vision of that's, a future free of waste, driven by low carbon and circular economy. So our sustainable packaging roadmap is really built around aspiring, and Nina brought up the distinction was, between aspiring goals, commitments, and I look forward to getting into that. But, we aspire to achieve by 2030 using zero virgin PET, having zero loss or plastic neutrality, and having zero impact from a negative environmental perspective. For 2025, the sustainable packaging goal is to use 50% recycled PET. That's resin number 1, and that's what we use primarily across our entire portfolio. And that's the most aggressive goal in our category. We also have interim goals that help us stay on track towards 2025, which include 25% rPET, recycled plastic in our packaging by the end of this year, and 100% rPET for our largest spring water brand, which is Poland Spring, and it's sold in the Northeast of the US by the end of next year.
Wow, that's very, very ambitious. And so I can see definitely how the corporate sustainability goals and the packaging goals are linked for both of your companies. But David, you mentioned water, and obviously that's a big part of what you're packaging. And so when these goals are being set, who's involved, and how does packaging get integrated into the overall strategy?
Yeah, I would say, we can get into this later, but I think it's important when you set your goals that they're within your sphere of influence. I've seen and have been a part of companies that have set goals that really, they don't have control of all the variables and they're at high risk of not meeting it. So that's we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. But so ultimately, who should be involved are all the internal stakeholders that are required to actually achieve the goal. So procurement, operations, marketing as well. And so, I think it's helpful to start with really, what's your vision of the future? Where do you want to be as a company after, in 2030, 40, 50, what have you, and then start to work backwards based on what are the issues important to you, what are material to you, and importantly, what are opportunities for you. So, for us, water and packaging are really the core material issues, but not a lot of people associate climate change as a material issue for us. So for us, that's an opportunity where we can lean in and be proactive. So I think within that context, if you set goals around your issues and opportunities, include all the internal stakeholders, stress test it with your external stakeholders before finalizing it, and then develop the internal transparency to execute, to stay on track, to understand where there's barriers, and work as one team to achieve them.
Great. And Luana, you're in a little different situation. You're part of a very large multinational corporation. I don't know how much influence some of the regions have on setting those corporate goals. Maybe you could talk about how are the corporate goals disseminated in a way, and the packaging goals, that the different regions can identify with them and buy into them.
Okay, so basically we as an international company, we set our goals at a global level with our leadership team, and of course consulting all the internal and external stakeholders, like David said. And I would say that as all companies, we also set our goals based on the regulations, because at the end they are non-negotiable to remain in business. But at Tetra Pak, we also set our goals based on what we understand is that are the most, or the global environmental challenges that we face today, and that impacts our business and that our business impacts on. So for example, climate change. We as a packaging industry, we believe that we need to minimize the climate impact that from our packages, from our products, from our systems and operations. Like for example, biodiversity. We think that we also need to make sure that the materials that we use are responsibly sourced, responsibly managed, so that we can protect the biodiversity, the species, the ecosystems. And of course, circular economy, because it's not only about eliminating waste, but making sure that our packages can be collected, recycled in practice and at scale. And finally, I would say that we also look at external experts outside our companies to help us really setting goals that will drive meaningful changes. For example, we were the first in the food packaging industry to have our climate targets approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative. So these kind of external organizations can help us to first, they challenge us on how to set the goals, and they help us to keep committed to the goals that we set.
Interesting. You bring up an interesting point in terms of the influence of external organizations, either in goal setting or in challenging you to potentially go a little further. So maybe you could talk about how important are peers in setting your goals, and what role do other external organizations such as voluntary commitments play in helping you set your goals? Maybe Luana, you could go first. Okay.
So first, talking about our peers' goals, it's extremely important for us to know their goals, because it's we cannot work in silos if we want to address issues like climate change or recycling. We need multiple organizations working together to move forward at the speed we really need things to move. So, and I would also add that knowing our peers' goals can lead us to partner with companies that we may not initially think on to join forces with, like our competitors. So for example, at Tetra Pak, we are working with the Carton Council in the US. So 10 years ago, we realized that we needed to increase the access to cartons recycling in the US, and our competitors, they needed to do the same. So we came together, we created the Carton Council, and we have seen really great results since then. So for example, today, most of the households in the country, they have access to cartons recycling, and we couldn't have done that alone. And to your second question about the voluntary commitments that we make, we are part of a number of voluntary commitments. I can mention the Science Based Targets Initiative. We are signatory of the RE100. We use the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a framework to define our impacts and how we are going to work with them. But really, what's important here is that we believe that the voluntary commitment is a way to raise awareness about the sustainability issues, it's a way to promote best practices among the companies, and especially it's how we can move the needle in shared goals that have like global or big, great impact.
Great. I think the whole concept of finding partners to go on the journey with you, whether they're peers or whether through the voluntary commitments, is so key to making significant progress. And David, how do you look at these issues of peer goals as well as voluntary commitments?
Yeah, I think they're very important from a couple different perspectives. I'll build on some things that Luana said, but imagine a company that is maybe not as far ahead as the leaders in its sector, its category, whatever. A sustainability practitioner can use their competitors' goals to help really move their own company forward faster, further. So those can be a great, use to drive internal change. I think the example that Luana brought up is a great example where, at some point in time, leaders use those goals to create competitive advantage. But at some point in time, there's sort of diminishing returns on those efforts, and you need to come together. And so you need from a mindset to move from, competitive advantage to collective advantage. And so, Luana can't achieve, the recycling rate that's required without collective action. We can achieve when we're trying to use 50% rPET. When you add up all the commitments from all of our competitors and bottled water suppliers, there's actually a massive gap between demand versus supply. So we need to move toward a collective advantage model to really help increase the supply of recycled content if we're going to meet all of our goals. So yeah, everyone's kind of racing to the top, but at some point in time, going further doesn't really matter, because it won't be reachable unless you come together and really form that collective advantage mindset.
So who else needs to be at the table, David, to help you do that aren't at the table today?
So for one, there's certain levers that we've been pulling and we need to continue to pull. Policy is really key. So that's one lever. At a local level, there's 20,000 different communities that have different recycling programs with different requirements, different guidelines, different processes. So, that's part of the ecosystem that needs to be at the table, and we need to be communicating. Then there's states, then there's federal level, then there's our customers, and then there's consumers as well. There's the processors. There's only about 25 companies in the US that are producing rPET, recycled PET flakes, that are key to producing the resin. We've built our strategy around 25 basically small to medium-sized companies with razor-thin margins. So they absolutely need to be at the table. And for us, we need to make long-term agreements so that they can go to the bank and monetize our commitments to continue to get low cost of capital to continue to invest in their business. So banking industry needs to be there, and they need to understand that this is a profitable business. Recycling is important. It's the only way to get to a circular economy. So, that's, I guess, a very general term that everyone in the ecosystem needs to be at the table. But I think it's important that not everyone has to be at the table at the same time. There's a few core folks that can come together early and get the ball rolling, and then include others as you move forward. Sometimes if you have too many, at the table, it's too difficult to move forward in a fast way and get scale.
Great. Luana, anything to add?
It said everything.
Okay.
I agree.
All right. So I'd like to sort of pivot to this idea of what can a goal do to help you change internally? So how does having an ambitious goal in an area affect other aspects of the company? And Luana, maybe we'll start with you, but in terms of product development or in terms of of new products coming to the market. Can you talk a little bit about the role that a goal might play in changing what you do?
Yeah, in fact, I have a current example what's happening now in Tetra Pak to help answer this question. So first of all, I believe that goals can really drive changes inside the companies. As I have already mentioned, we have our ambition to create the most sustainable package of the world. And we have outlined 4 key R&D areas to focus on that we believe they will, they can help us to make this ambition to become a reality. So the 4 key pillars are, first, increase the renewable share of our materials, of the packages. The second one is use recycled materials whenever possible, of course, respecting all the food safety requirements. The third one is to develop sustainable and anti-littering openings like straws or caps. And the fourth one is enable recycling by design, which means that we want to create a package that have like a high post-consumption value for the whole value chain, the whole recycling chain. And with these 4 key pillars and with a very clear vision, we guide all our decisions in terms of the financial investment that we need to make, the resources that we need to have, the timeline for these developments that we need to define, or the pilots and the trials that we need to run to validate this kind of development. So then we start seeing that the company is getting ideas off the paper and things start happening, and this is very cool.
So does this influences your CapEx decisions? It influences what actually gets money to proceed and what doesn't. And is that changing minds if there are people in the company that maybe lagged a little bit in seeing how important is this? Does that type of decision in terms of, well, here's where the money's going, is that making a difference?
Sure. Sustainability is at our 2030 strategy, and it's important because everyone in the company is aware of it and knows their role, the role that they need to play to achieve this strategy. So this can really move the company, the entire company.
Great. And David, what about examples within BlueTriton in terms of how it's influencing perhaps R&D or new products?
Gosh, I can't overemphasize the importance to have, big, bold goals as a company, to have goals in general. I think when you're in a position to really set bold goals, companies go through, levels of maturity when it comes to sustainability. There are those companies that are really focused on, they're at that point in time where they're just really digging in on aggressive continuous improvement goals. And then there's companies that have matured to setting, net zero goals. And then there are companies that are, really out there setting net positive or regenerative goals or aspirations, what you have it. But regardless of where you're at, goals are really important because they get the company aligned and moving in the same direction. But I think it's critical. You can't just have goals. They have to be integrated into key business processes like CapEx. CapEx is a great example where, there's limited money to go around. So you've got projects, whether you're a small company or a global company, you've got projects that are vying for approval. And when companies that have measurable, impactful, sustainable benefits that drive the company closer towards those goals, and they get the money, that drives kind of this internal competition and inspires, employees. And I think it helps to drive innovation and creativity. And I think that leads to just another important part or an outcome of having these goals is it really helps to attract great talent. And it certainly helps to retain that talent and, importantly, get them highly engaged and motivated. I mean, it's hard to argue with doing something where you feel like you're providing a benefit much greater than yourself and that you're proud of your company. And sustainability is just kind of falls in naturally to get people fired up, inspired, and be proud of what their company's doing.
So that brings up a good point in terms of how do you ensure that you actually meet these goals? And what happens when you don't? Because if everybody's expectations are that, yes, these are bold goals and we're striving for them, what mechanisms are in place inside the company, whether it's rewards for executives or I'm not sure, but what are you doing to make sure that you meet them?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, there's a whole suite of things that companies can do. One thing that we do is we create sort of, dashboards. So when it comes to sustainable packaging, we have monthly reviews at a leadership level. We have executive, those functions that, are sort of make up the internal stakeholders. Their leadership is involved in this monthly review. And we make it very visible and very data driven on the progress. And when we're not on track, that's the area that gets the attention. And, you could couple that with performance targets related to it that drive variable compensation. That's another highly motivating way to, keep people focused and hold accountability towards meeting those goals.
Great, thank you. And Luana, what is Tetra Pak doing to ensure that you'll meet those goals?
Well, first, I agree with what David said. We need to really be data-driven and make everybody aware of the goals and the progress. And I would add 3 key factors that are helping us at Tetra Pak to keep on track. So the first one, I think, is that sustainability being part of the core, the strategy, being regularly discussed is key for us. Then the second one is to set bold, but at the same time, achievable and realistic goals, because otherwise you will only be frustrated. And the third one is collaboration. Collaboration is a big part of this journey, because we need other stakeholders to really help support and guide us. So if I can mention one example of goal that we recently met, we are part of the RE100. We committed to reach 100% renewable electricity in our global operations by 2030. And when we signed this pledge, renewable electricity accounted for 20% of our global usage. And today, last year, we reached 83%. And if we take a look at the US, only the US market, we already reached 100% renewable electricity. So this shows how much you need to be serious about your goals, how hard you need to work to achieve them. And this is my message: collaboration is key.
Great, and that's a wonderful example of showing how that really stretched the company in new ways. We've only got a couple minutes left, so what I would love to hear is, especially on the area of collective action, or what do you need to move forward? And maybe David, you could start this, but what's your call out to the rest of the industry to help eliminate any of the bottlenecks that you identified? What do you want others to do?
Well, it's critical for sustainable packaging to have more recycled content. I mean, their innovation needs to happen in new materials and biodegradable, et cetera. But when it comes to taking single-use packaging and creating endless use packaging by keeping those types of resins at the same application level, for us, high quality food grade PET is what we use, what we need. And so, we need things around improved technology at MRFs for improved sortation to minimize contamination. We need massive amounts of investment in consumer and household engagement and education. And we need policy to help drive the market signals in ways. So whether that's bottle bills for our products, I mean, there's only 10 states in the US that have bottle bills where beverage containers have some sort of financial incentive to return them. Not all of them include still bottled water. So for example, here in Michigan, where I'm at right now, carbonated beverages have a 10-cent deposit on it, and they have about a 90% recycling rate. Still water doesn't have any financial incentive on it. It's not part of the bottle scheme, and it has about an 18% recycling rate. So we need harmonization, modernization of policy that helps to improve recycling rates, whether that's an EPR, extended producer responsibility, or a bottle bill. We're sort of policy agnostic. We need policy to drive change and improve recycling rates. I don't know if that answers your question specifically, Nina.
It does. And we just have a few seconds left. So Luana, the last word to you.
Oh, so I will just finish saying that we are not alone. We are working together. The challenges from all of us, and count on Tetra Pak.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. You've provided so many useful insights, and you also provided your emails. So folks, if you have additional questions of either of our guests, please reach out to them. And thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.